Okay, hello everyone. Let's get started. Okay, so I will give myself a brief introduction. I'll keep it a little bit shorter than last week because hopefully you sort of were here for the first session. As the intro slide says, my name is Harry Nichols. I'm going to be taking all 4 of these sessions. Okay. And if you can't tell either from being in the room or the microphone, yeah, there might be a little advantage I have being a native speaker for these language skills. So let's talk about what these language skills are going to entail and what are we going to be testing in this NMAT exam. But also as we go through, let's talk about what the presentation is going to entail. So we're going to have introduction, that's going to be general tips relating to exam strategy, covering the whole paper, covering all question types. Quite similar to last week's session, we are going to have some pieces of advice which will cover absolutely everything, or some pieces of advice which will be important for most of the questions, but for some of the questions, for example, it will be really important. Okay, so I will bring these up as we go, but as far as I'm concerned, it's good news for any of you trying to take the test, because it means, yeah, we're going to have think about 6 different question types, and this means you don't have to memorize a list of tips, etc., for all 6 of these, because a lot of this advice is going to apply across different question types as well. We'll have plenty of time for practice questions. Okay, we have a nice selection of all different types. And we'll have the time during this presentation to sort of really go through them together, rather than sort of making them quick examples, which I speed past. Okay, so let's just talk about the language skills section in general. Okay. This will include some sort of preparatory tips. Some of these sections are going to be much easier to prepare for in advance. I will let you know specifically the ones which are more difficult as we're going along. But let's also start with time advice, general advice. The first piece of advice will be surprising to no one. Time is really important here. We're going to go into specifics in a moment, but let me tell you there are more marks than there are minutes. Okay, so a returning thing that's going to be common throughout my advice is going to be time cutting strategies. Okay. And in certain instances, especially heading into the reading comprehension, which will be our first test, or our first question type to discuss, I'm even going to suggest that you sort of grow your comfort with being uncomfortable. Okay, because when you're going through a test like this, you're going to want to read it thoroughly, do your best job, and then you realize that you've run out of time and you only did 4 of the questions, right? But in terms of preparation, it's mostly good news, okay? There are going to be some exceptions with the vocabulary section of this test, but aside from vocabulary, outside knowledge should not be used. So you don't need to go off doing a whole bunch of humanities research or hope that the reading comprehension tasks that come up are something you are already knowledgeable in. In fact, frequently the opposite is true. It's very hard to bring in your own biases and your own opinions when you simply know nothing about it. With regards to time, remember there is not a single section of this exam which is not multiple choice. Okay, don't worry, I'm going to give you more useful advice than eliminating obviously incorrect answers. But actually, eliminating incorrect answers quickly will often trump the advice I do give you. Okay, because that piece of advice I can give in 20 seconds, but actually implementing it will save you much more time than those 20 seconds. I'm just not going to mention it repeatedly. So here are the exact numbers. You get 36 questions in 28 minutes, which seems contrary to the idea of allowing 30 seconds per question, okay? We can see there that it should be under a minute, but it's not 30 seconds. The reason that we recommend you allow 30 seconds per question is because the reading comprehension questions are going to take longer than that. So you need to give yourself some room to work with, okay? You need to give yourself that room to work with. So I recommend doing the other questions slightly under the average time so that you have as much time to spare when it comes to those reading comprehension questions. My last piece of actually much more practical advice is keep a vocabulary diary. Not only just keep a vocabulary diary of common words that you're learning day to day, but you need to be going to seek out those annoying, slightly old academic articles, okay? As you will see when we go through some of these sample questions, the vocabulary demand is quite high. Can the new joiners please mute their microphones for me? Thank you. Going through this test, going through this material myself, I learned new words. So do not take that lightly, even if you feel like you have a good vocabulary. And by the way, I'm sure you're right. I'm exactly in the same category. Even for a native speaker, I consider myself to have quite a good vocabulary. The list of words which they sort of give you as sort of commonly unknown, I knew about half of them if I'm being generous to myself. Okay? Don't worry, that doesn't mean that I'm going to end this session by giving you a list of 1,000 words you have to memorize the definition of. In fact, I'm going to sort of go the other way and recommend sort of analysis by suffix, by prefix, to try and make educated guesses towards word meanings. Remember, you won't need to get it down to an option you're sure of. You'll need to get it down to an option you're most confident in. So I'm not going to recommend you sit there with a writing dictionary from the 1800s to try and work out all these very complicated words, but we'll speak more about that when we get there. But yes, I do recommend being proactive and trying to learn these new words anyway. So after all that preamble, let's talk about the question types. We have 6 question types to talk about. Again, just like last week, there is going to be a lot of crossover, both in terms of my advice and what the questions are asking of you. We will go into plenty more detail, but whilst we're here, let me give you a short overview of each of these question types. The reading comprehension is going to be the most similar to what you probably did in school, in other areas, etc. You're going to have a big, scary looking lump of text, and then you're going to have about 3 to 4 questions which follow it. This is why we recommend sort of giving a bit more of your average time to the reading comprehension, because even when we go into details about scan reading, skim reading, accepting that you're not going to have the time to go into the depth you would like to, it's still just going to take you that much more time than some of the other questions. With paragraph formation, you will be given 3 to 4, maybe even to 5 sentences, and your job is to put them in order. Okay, we're going to talk about specific advice, obviously, but let me sort of follow the bad news with some good news. In my experience, the paragraph formation can be one of those areas you're making up time. Okay, we'll give you tips, but a lot of them will just be a little bit quicker anyway. Error identification is one of the more difficult question types, if I'm honest. Mainly because there's a lot to cover if you're trying to revise, etc. Remembering last week I was talking about those mathematical questions and I said I couldn't say too much because there's no way I'm just covering the entirety of school level mathematics, even if we do have a fairly long time. We're going to have a similar sort of issue with this error identification. It is primarily assessing your grammar. Okay, it's assessing whether you know when to use your S form verbs, whether you know to have like noun agreement, things like this. Okay, I'm sure these are things which you've already covered in your previous experience in learning English, but that's where these are really going to come in. Getting on to prepositions. If you don't know the term, these are sort of verbs followed by helping words, right? To stand up for someone, to stand by someone, etc. All of these slightly idiomatic phrases. This is also going to be another one which is a little bit difficult to prepare for. Okay, my main recommendation for this will be honestly probably what you're already doing. Let's be honest, we're in 2025. You're going to be listening to lots of what I call native media in the presentation, right? Listening to native speaker podcasts, YouTube videos, whatever. Because in natural native speech, these just come up a lot. But there's a lot of potential prepositions, okay? Sentence completion will come down to analyzing the context of some sentence and thinking, okay, which of these 5 options or 5 or so options that I have been given best completes this sentence. That doesn't sound so bad, but just to pre-warn you, the sentence completion has some of the toughest vocabulary within the test. Okay, so it gives with one hand, it takes with the other. Yes, the actual task is not going to be that difficult, but some of the words are. Okay. And analogies. This is actually going to be quite similar to what we had in the last section. They're going to give you 2 words. And what you need to do is understand the relationship between them. You'll then have, let's say, 4 to 5 other pairs of words, and you want to find the pair which best exemplifies the relationship between the original pair of words. Okay, let's move on to sort of specifics regarding the reading comprehension. Okay, so I'm not going to repeat myself regarding this being the longest section in terms of just pure amount of writing, but I am going to give you a bit more advice in terms of what questions you're going to get. Okay, these will cover general things, but they will require more specific things regarding writer intention, tone, meaning in context. Don't worry, we'll get a little bit further on to that. But the most important skills we're going to start off with here are going to relate to skim reading and scanning. So let's just talk about what those are real quick. Skimming is sort of reading quickly and loosely. If you've done any sort of academic research or anything like that before, you'll have some idea of what this is like. You know that a book is in approximately the area you'd like it to be, but you're going to sort of have to run your eyes. Notice I don't say read. You're going to run your eyes quickly, looking for those key themes and ideas that would allow you to make notes if you so choose, right? So you can go here and I can go, okay, the writer is trying to communicate this. This is the main point of their persuasive text. It's going to be getting broad strokes and broad ideas. This is the only thing you should really be doing with the reading comprehension questions before you actually get on to the questions. Okay? Once you've skimmed through the text like that, you have ideas of themes, what each paragraph is trying to say. Then you can read the questions. Some of them, firstly, you might just be able to answer from that skim reading alone. But for those that you can't, you'll have a more specific idea of what you're looking for, and you can go back and scan the text. The two words seem very similar, but scanning specifically refers to searching for key words, searching for key themes. You know what the question's asking about now, look for it. And lastly, using these two together can really help you build something called a passage map. Okay, for example, if you can write down paragraph 1 is introducing this idea, paragraph 2 is expanding upon this idea by providing evidence of such, such, such. If you can summarize paragraph 1, 2, and 3 in that way, you are much less likely to be caught off guard by any of the questions. You're building good understanding before you even reach the questions themselves. Don't worry, not in our first example, but a couple of examples in, I will have an exemplar, I will have an example of what this passage map can look like. So let it also be known that whilst I do recommend making a passage map like this, remember time is of the essence, okay? You're not going to get marks in your passage map. Make it in short note form. It doesn't have to be full sentences. In fact, it's probably worse if it is. You'll still be under time constraints. So, these are more specific pieces of advice. One I touched upon at the beginning, I want you to be a little bit more comfortable with discomfort. You're going to want to really sort of bear down into it, understand it in as much depth as you possibly can. And you'll also need to understand you can't do that. Okay? You can't do that. Don't worry, neither am I suggesting that you go through with no understanding whatsoever. Yes, please read. But be okay with sort of working in inexactitudes. I included this second point here because it's something I honestly do way too frequently. I'm not going to go a ton into my personal backstory, but I came here to study philosophy, a famously difficult subject to read, and I was the only native speaker on my course. Everyone thought I was going to be the fastest to get through the material. I was not. Firstly, I'm not a particularly fast reader anyway. Secondly, I did this regression all the time. Okay, I'll finish reading a sentence, I'll get to the end of it and go, if I'm honest with myself, I didn't really fully understand that. Suddenly, one page is essentially 4 because you've sat there reading it 4 times. Okay, again, it's normally quite good to aim for perfect understanding. This is not one of those times, okay? Don't go back rereading. You can always go back and reread if after you've read the questions you realise, oh yes, that was the important part. But once you've spent 3 times rereading it, you can't go back and reclaim that time. Yeah? One thing you can do before the exam is practice active reading. Okay, this means appraising the writer's intention. Why are they making certain word choices? Why are they making certain points? This will particularly help you with some of the later question types, which I will go into. And lastly, think ahead. If you can predict what's coming, you're understanding. Okay, if you can see what's coming, then you've got very good understanding. Normally, by the time you get to, like, let's say the end of the second or the beginning of the third paragraph, you should have a strong idea what the conclusion is going to be, right? So, what question types can we have here? Not going to spend a massive amount of time on the global and detailed ones because they're as you would expect. The global questions deal with the text as a whole, and the detailed questions deal with specific sections, specific points being made at certain points in the text. That's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think we need to go into that much more. These meaning in context questions, however, tend to trip up students. Okay, these will highlight, for example, why did the author use this particular word at this point? Or more specifically, what does this word mean in this context? The reason that students get tripped up is because they get excited that they know what the word means in general. They write that down, they move on, or they pick that answer and they move on. But nearly all of these questions are checking that you can understand words being used in non-standard ways, or in colloquial ways, or ways which apply to a specific setting. Very rarely, if ever, is the answer to one of these meaning in context questions just the dictionary definition of the word. Okay? Though that's, I suppose, good news if you don't know the dictionary definition of the word either. So, these function questions are more accurately going to be sort of why this word choice, not what does this word mean, but why did they use it? What are they trying to persuade you of in their usage of it? This is where the active reading is really going to help. The last type of question is the one we perhaps need to be the most careful of. Okay, yes, in 10 lines of writing, there are 9 gaps. I want you to read between the lines. But that is not a free pass to be really bold with your inferences. Okay, one of the pieces of advice I gave last week that I'll give this week as well is you've got to be really careful of over-inferring. 9 times out of 10, it is you took something which the author slightly hinted and you ran with it because it is reflected in your own opinion as well. Okay, so inference is important, but as is knowing where inference should stop. Let's have a look at a question. Okay, I'm just going to leave that up on the screen. For this first one, just while we're getting a better understanding of these questions and what to expect, I'm going to leave it up for a little bit longer. But for a couple of the other examples I have coming up, I am going to switch away from it faster so that we're practicing as it will be in the exam. We feel that's enough time? I'm happy to take the nods of the people in the room as priority. Okay, I think that's enough time. So, here we have a nice set of example questions. I particularly included this as the first example for this first question. They love these except type questions. Okay, they love these except type questions. So they're giving you 4 things that can be inferred and 1 thing that cannot. Though this does have some nice advantages. You don't have to go through and eliminate 4 incorrect answers. You have to go and find 1 incorrect answer. So lots of these might be a little bit quicker because maybe you can read through one of these and immediately see, oh no, not that. Right. Okay, so which of these cannot be inferred? India has faced various foreign invasions in the past. Yeah, wish it wasn't a British person doing the presentation. Philosophy was held in high regard in older civilizations. There has been complacency in Indian philosophical thought. Unity of India was affected due to its vast geographical area, and political invasion has not had any impact on India's spiritual integrity. Even if in your mind you've got it down to like 1 of 2, maybe 2 or 3, when you look back at the text to reference the other much more specific question, you'll keep that in mind and you'll find out which of the 2 it really is. So, I told you they love these except questions. They haven't included the word except in this one, but I hope that you can see it essentially is, right? It's essentially the same here. Which of the following cannot be inferred from the passage? India is a true example of unity and diversity. The integrity of Indian culture is much stronger than natural or physical forces. India will actively contribute to the progress of mankind. The author predicts that India's progress is due to its political machinery, and Indian unity stood strong even in the face of adversaries. To me, this is an example of one where you can pick it quite quickly and move on. What do we think the answer is here? What do we think the answer is here? Okay, cool. We'll bear it in mind and we'll go back then. We'll keep it as it would be in the real exam. And we have a function question. What is the primary purpose of the author in writing the passage? Are we comparing Indian philosophy with that of other civilizations? Are they analyzing the connection between Indian civilization and philosophy? Is it to trace the impact of political invasions on Indian philosophy, to discuss the points of unity in India, or to discuss the rise of spiritual aspirations in India? You might think a couple of these come up, but one of the things I'll recommend, especially it's even helpful during the skimming period. So not when you're going back and really trying to find the details that answer the question, but before you even get to the questions themselves. Primary purposes are not mentioned just once. If you see a point coming up again and again, or being supported and then mentioned again, much more likely that it's a primary purpose or it's a heavy priority for the writer. I'll go back before I go. I'll go forward before I go back though, because we have one question left. From the passage, which of the following cannot be concluded? So again, it's very similar to an except type question. It has a goal of bringing together different people. It brought together theoretical and practical activities. It was immune to political upheavals. Spirituality is an important part of it. It is not subjugated by time. Can the online attendees please mute their microphones? Thank you. Okay, and this is a point where I will highlight, okay, it's one of my personal interests, but if it's one of your personal interests too, please keep that personal viewpoint, that personal knowledge out of it. I'm specifically looking at part D, whether spirituality is a big part of Indian philosophy is not itself important. It's whether the author is trying to communicate it. Okay. So, with these 4 questions in mind, hopefully you've limited it down to 1 or a couple from each question, enough that when we go back to the text, you're going to know more what you are looking for. I'll give us another couple of minutes and then I'll show us an exemplar answer. Okay. Hopefully, if you've not got a sort of full set of answers in your head, you've got enough in your mind to really go through, have a look at these exemplar answers that we've got, and see how they line up with your thoughts. Okay, also just a small thing. Unfortunately, as I'm going through this presentation, the text size is going to change a little bit. Okay, if I needed a section of the book which was as wide as the page, yeah, the text size is going to get smaller. There's not much I can do about that, unfortunately. So, initially, we've just got sort of topic and scope. What are they talking about in a general sense? And then what are they going into more detail about? What's the point they're really trying to make? As promised, we have an example of a passage map here. Okay, P1, P2, P3, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3. After you've done a few of these passage maps, you'll realize that they tend to end up in a recurring structure, right? It's some form of introduction of the ideas. It's some expansion upon the ideas. It's some sort of conclusion regarding the ideas. So please make your passage map more detailed than intro, midpoint, conclusion. So here we've got a passage map that the first paragraph is telling us that philosophy was the biggest achievement and a contribution to Indian civilization. If when you're making your own passage map, you just want to write philosophy, an arrow saying big achievement, big part of Indian culture, cool. You've just saved yourself some time. Congratulations. The second paragraph states that India can be best understood in this spiritual context. Okay, for example, some of the answers we're going to go through are wrong because yes or no, the text is not focusing on the different invasions India has gone through over time, but it will definitely be implied, right? There will have been invasions over time, but it's not the focus. And the point of paragraph 2 is entirely that it is not the focus. And our third paragraph is just further building on that point and saying, as it has done in the past, spirituality will define Indian culture and lead to its growth in the future as well. Okay. I am going to, from here on out, have to switch back and forth a little bit because, as you can see, they don't have the answers. They just have the comments on them. Another piece of advice I'll give you, if you can go through and sort of give a reason why or why not, it is each one. Wonderful. But if you're writing things which are this long for answers which you're ultimately going to reject, and you're doing that within the time limit, you're better than me. Okay? So keep these note-like, and if you can see that it's not one of them immediately, you don't need to waste time sitting there writing next to yourself, why not? What I would be doing is focusing on, let's say, the 2, maybe 3, which are plausible options, right? The 2 or 3 you're choosing between. You don't need to waste time writing why you discarded one of the clearly discardable ones. So, each of the following can be inferred from the passage except. So A says India has faced various foreign invasions. Okay, for me, this is stated directly. Even the explanation which they've given here is fairly short. The only thing that comes to my mind is whether I'd write anything at all. Okay, the text is talking about foreign invasions. I don't need to consider that hard whether it's talking about foreign invasions. That's not what I wanted to do. Cool. So, going back, philosophy was held in high regard in older civilizations. Again, it's a massive focus on the paragraph. I'm not going to spend time focusing on why it can indeed be inferred. It's even mentioned in the passage map, right? So we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. There has been complacency in Indian philosophical thought. When I was talking, okay, no one else was quite so sure. So I kind of moved on rather than putting my answers in your mouth. But C to me was one of the answers which it absolutely could have been. Right? Has there been complacency in Indian philosophical thought? That would be one of the things which I was highlighting in my brain, so that when I go back and look through those in more detail, I can make an ultimate decision on that. But I don't know if any of you saw it on that second look, but it does go on to mention passivity of some centuries in that last section. So yes, actually C is spoken about, so no, it's not going to be our answer. D, the unity of India was affected due to its vast geographical area. Okay, this was the other answer, which I thought there was little talk of its geographical area, let alone it affecting the unity of India. But this goes into more detail. Let me remind you, you don't need to go into such detail. If you can do in a few words what they've done in a few lines, all the better. And once you hit the correct answer, the answer you know you're going to write down. I know I'm just repeating myself, but you don't need to write about E, for example, if you already know you're picking D. Okay. I'm only going to highlight a couple of these for the remaining ones. We've got plenty of examples, and 3 hours is a lot of time, but it's not indefinite. So, let's go back to question 2. For the people in the room, which of these are plausible answers? Maybe if we're not down to a specific one, which of these are plausible answers for you? What do we think? Remember, it's another one of those except questions, so we're looking for one which cannot be. For me, it's between C and D. And I'm being kind to C there. Remember, as we were going through this one, I actually said this is one which I'd mark quickly and move on. The only talk of the political machinery in that exact phrasing was essentially to disavow it and say that it was unimportant. So for me, this can be one of the quicker questions. This can be one of the places that we're saving time. The reason that I mentioned C is, most of this topic or most of this text was talking about inner India, the effect of India within itself, India's internal progress. The progress of mankind in general would need some evidence for me. I would need to find some section which is really talking about that. So let's focus on C and D here. Yeah, they agree with me on C. This is beyond the scope of the passage. It's talking about India's contributions to philosophy and essentially philosophy's contributions to India, but nothing outside of that. We're not talking about the progress of mankind, anything like that. And yes, D is looking strong. The author mentions political triumph to illustrate instability, more as a con than a pro. Definitely not suggesting that the country's progress is due to political machinery. Before anyone gets the wise idea to read on, let's do something similar with question 3. Let's sit here and go, okay, I'm not sure, maybe it's between 1 or 2, because I do encourage the passage map method, but I would really be trying to use it to separate 1 or 2 answers you're maybe undecided between, not trying to do it with all 5 answers for all 4 questions. Which are your top runners here for the primary purpose of the author in writing the passage? Any ideas? To me, B is a really strong answer. Okay, A is not, because they're talking about Indian philosophy, but they're not talking about any other country's philosophy. The main body of the text is linking how Indian philosophy and Indian civilization have both developed alongside each other and how they aid each other in that. D and E are both plausible to me, but unless I go back and look through the text and see something that makes one of these answers jump out, answer B is definitely looking the strongest to me. Okay, and this paragraph, this question breakdown agrees with me. Okay, and notice that if we sort of go back here, you could have probably answered that question from the passage map alone. Right? If you're making a good passage map, you don't have to go through, and I'm specifically looking at that sort of P1, P2, P3 part of the passage map. You don't have to go back to the big scary piece of text, because you're going to get those key ideas from a good passage map. For the last time with this question, what are your top runners? Right? Not necessarily a full answer, though if you think one is, definitely the answer, I'm definitely up for hearing that as well. Which of the following cannot be concluded about Indian philosophy? Any top twos, top threes? Hopefully not top fives. Okay, let me help out. B is nearly an exact quote from the text. I'm getting rid of it and I'm moving on. Okay. A, again, seems very similar to themes of the text. We are talking about bringing together great diversities of peoples. It was immune to political upheavals. Again, borderline a direct quote from the text. Okay, we should be sort of getting rid of that one pretty quickly. And then you can go through as so. Okay, I didn't quite include the answer thing for question 4, but I think we're getting the context here. Okay, so we've got two more examples, but frankly, I would prefer just to use one of them in a way that is going to be more reflective of how it will be in the exam. Hence, I've just nicely switched it away from you before we started reading. And I will be a little bit shorter on the time I display the original text. That first question is much more of an example. I want this one to be much more like practice. Okay, so I'm going to put up this text for 1 minute and 30 seconds. I will be watching nothing but my watch. Remember, you're looking to skim through it, get broad ideas. We'll go back to the specifics once we know what the questions are. Off we go.
I'm sorry, Doctor, could you please reshare the screen for online participants?
Sorry, can the online participants not see the screen?
Yes, the screen sharing was cancelled.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'll get that fixed. Is that better now?
Yes, it is better. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you for drawing my attention to it. And thank you for the attendees putting their hands up. Once we've had time to finish reading this text, I will indeed ask for questions. Okay, let's have a look at the questions. Okay, so here we're starting off. We are starting off with a question on the author's choice. Why are they choosing to use Cyclops as an example? We have another one of their favorite from the passage. Each of these can be inferred except. Then question 3 and 4 are much more of this, or specifically question 3 is much more of this detailed focus. They're asking a specific question about why digital cameras are preferred over rangefinders. Okay. Though notice, even if you didn't see which section they're speaking about here, one of these options can be eliminated immediately. Why? Why? Which of these options can we get rid of immediately? Has anyone ever preferred something because it's more fiddly? If you don't know the word, that is something which is sort of hard to use. Maybe, imagine trying to put a string through a sewing needle. It's that sort of annoying process. No one is going to prefer something because it is fiddly. If you haven't heard the word fiddly before, it just comes from the word fiddle as an adjective. And lastly, we have a sort of what's the main purpose of the author in writing the passage. Okay. Please look through each of the answers. Think which of these can be dismissed immediately. Which of these answers are you trying to choose between? Again, hopefully you've got a list of a couple of possible answers for a couple of these questions. I'll give us one more minute going back to the original text, and then I will take those questions from people who put their hands up in the audience, and we will talk about exemplar answers. Okay, so anyone that's in the online session, if you put your hand up, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you might have, and then we'll go through what could be answers to this. Again, I welcome your contributions even if you're online. Who had their hand raised? Just unmute yourself, ask away. Okay, Thierry, please unmute yourself. What's your question? Okay, Louis or Lewis, I'm not sure. Again, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question, please do.
It was about the macro, the screen.
So it was about what, sorry?
It was about the sharing of the screen, please.
Oh, so it was about the previous question. And the other person with their hand raised? That answers that question. Okay, let's keep it in the room then. Okay, what do we think are good answers for these questions? We'll just start in the reasonable order. Why does the author use an example of the Cyclops in this passage? What do we think? Maybe you don't have a complete answer. Maybe you don't have a complete answer. But what's your top two? Which ones are you choosing between?
I would say C.
C, okay. Okay. Is it just C full stop to you, or do you have other answers it might be?
Full stop.
C full stop for you. Cool. Anyone else? Okay. What about question 2 then? Which of these cannot be inferred? Uncertain. Again, doesn't have to be an exact answer. If you can get me sort of close, that's all fine. Maybe these are the 2 or 3 which you'll be sat there with your passage map for. Okay, then we'll leave that one as it is until we get to the exemplar answers. What are we thinking for question 3? Why is a digital camera preferred over a rangefinder? It's not because it's more fiddly, but we have 4 remaining options it could be. Any thoughts? Okay, then we'll again leave that one as it is and we'll see what the exemplar answers say. What is the main purpose of the author in writing the passage? Do we think they have a motivation? Are they trying to persuade or are they trying to inform? Frequently, it's a bit of both. Okay, let's look at those exemplar answers then. Okay, so looking at that first part here. Yep, your C full stop was absolutely correct. I don't know if you sort of went through the process of elimination or you just found that answer to be convincing on its own merits. But yes, the author uses the example of a Cyclops to introduce the topic of robots and how, even though, and they go into more detail, but frankly, I would suggest you stop there. Yes, they use it as a contrast between big, stupid, old mythical creatures and new, clever technology. But once you've got the answer, you don't get extra marks for writing another sentence of clarification. Looking at question 2. So here we couldn't even really massively limit it down. Which wasn't too bad, but it was slightly disappointing, mainly because there's just simply no talk of creating 3D maps. Okay, so answer is E here. The answer is E here. For question 3, to remind you, this is why are digital cameras preferred over rangefinders. Actually, they do have some of the correct terms in part C, but for the reason I mentioned, it's the other way around. Okay, it says that rangefinders are expensive and fiddly. One of those is bad, 2 of those is worse. Okay, so we're looking for digital cameras which are smaller, cheaper, easier to use. Okay, lastly, we'll look at 4. What's the main purpose? To me, it's either C or E. It's either C or E. Those are the ones I find most persuasive. Okay, so lots of these will have similar things written to them, that they are part of the passage, they are not the full focus. They are not the full focus of the passage. Okay, and for this, because I said between C and E, yeah. And they're saying that it's a bit too specific to be computers in general. I buy that. Okay, and that last one is the only one which talks about the whole passage. And if you're talking about primary purpose, you should indeed be talking about the whole passage, or the whole passage should be talking about this. Okay. Okay, so I've got one more example here. The only one I'm going to actually focus on here, and I will give you the question before I give you the text in the interest of time, is I wanted one question for us which is meaning and context, like I mentioned in the beginning. So I'm going to draw your attention to question 3 here. What is the meaning of the term clique as used in the last sentence of the passage? So it tells you exactly where to look. You tell me. So what does the word clique mean there? What does the word clique mean there? Group, status, mob, faction, or crew. Now, to me, it's good to have an example of this sort of question, but let me give you some reassurance. The rest of the meaning and context questions are less likely to have words which are broadly synonyms. Okay, the words mob, faction, crew, and group have different connotations. That's absolutely true. But they have broadly similar meaning. But in an instance like this, yes, go by connotation, which is the connotation you feel most appropriate. The correct answer here is A. Okay, so it's just simply they did not become part of the group of famous men who had earned glory in Machiavelli's eyes. Okay. So let's start talking about some of the other topics. As you can tell, if you're keeping track of the time management, we are going to be spending, and now we have spent much more time on that first type of question than we will necessarily spend on the others. Okay, but that is for good reason. I'm sure even as we were going through those reading comprehension tasks, you saw, for example, annoying, slightly old language or just words that you have to read around, you have to understand in context, etc. And there's a lot of key skills to talk about here. But moving on, we definitely will not be spending a similar amount of time on all of the rest. Let's talk about paragraph formation. Okay, I'm going to keep this part quick. Yes, we're going to be organizing, ordering a selection of sentences to put them in the correct order of a reasonable paragraph. This is to understand structure, both grammatical structure and the structure of presenting a point well. So aside from this, I'm going to be able to give you specific things to look out for grammar-wise. Just like I did kind of with the ordering exercises if you were here last week. A lot of, or at least some of the same advice is going to apply. If you can find two sentences which go together, particularly if they clearly go at the beginning or they clearly go to the end, that is going to be your first rung on the ladder. That's going to get you a grip you can start building with. It's going to get you a starting point. Look for linking temporal, which just means related to time if you're not aware, and other such words. These are going to broadly work how you would expect them to. But you can also look for words like however, although, things which imply tension. If you're following a word that implies tension by something that agrees with the original sentence, it's probably not the correct order. Here I've got look for names, articles, acronyms, and pronouns. That looks like a weird piece of advice until I go into a little bit more detail. If a person is being introduced, they will first use their full name. These are normally formal pieces of writing. The next time they're mentioned, maybe it'll be Mr. something, Mrs. something, slightly shortened. Further down, it will be pronouns, right? It will be he, this, she, that, they, whatever. So if you can track that going through, the longest version, slightly shorter, even shorter still, that's going to give you much more help than it has any reasonable desire to. Okay, same thing is going to go for acronyms. Even in that one we just looked at, talking about SLAM, the first time they mentioned it, they gave you what the acronym actually stood for. And then later, as you're going through the text, it's just referred to as that acronym. So you can essentially take the same logic, right? The more detail goes first, and as we relax, we're continuing through. Even if they're not sentence pairs, obvious openers and obvious closers will help you get your foot in the door. This general to specific piece of advice, again, might need a little bit of explanation. What I'm talking about here is someone making a general point and then giving a specific example which sort of follows up on it, all right? A lot of the way you were taught to write persuasive paragraphs in school, etc., they're going to be obeying here as well, so watch out for that. Speaking of things to watch out for, the flow of ideas is useful, but frequently, okay, I'm going to use an annoying word, it's non-deterministic, okay? you can have a couple of different orders which still have a reasonable flow to the ideas. It's not a bad consideration, it's just not a primary consideration. Maybe it's something you can use to separate two possible answers that you're unsure about at the end, but I would not use it as your primary weapon. And lastly, I will highlight something that I mentioned at the beginning. Do not lose confidence if you're not familiar with the topic. In fact, if anything, you should gain it. It means one potential problem of bringing in your own knowledge or your own opinion has been avoided. Here's an example for us. Notice here, my piece of advice surrounding proper nouns, i.e. names, is actually all you need. Right? You can go Minister for Water Resources, James Smith, not just a name introduction, but a title. Why do we care about this man? Why do we value his opinion on the given topic? Then in part A, we have Mr. Smith. So a shortened version, but still some level of formality. And then by the time we get to B, it's just he. So we can go sort of CAB quite quickly. But if that were not the case, we have helpful words such as also, right? You can as soon as you realize that B starts with he also, yeah, it's not going to be first, is it? It's not going to be first. This is what it will look like in context. Okay, that last one is mainly just to give an example to prove a point. Here I'm going to show you what the answers possibly look like as well. And in the interests of saving time, you should cross-reference these. Okay, we're going to have another session for just dedicated mathematics. There were 24 possible different orders for 4 different sentences. You can ignore 19 of them. We only have 4 options available to us. Also, looking at the options which are available to us, whilst we probably wouldn't anyway, we can officially not focus on C first. Right? C being first is just straight up not an option. Okay, and as soon as we decide if we want A, B, or D first, we're down to 2 options at most. If we decide we want the last sentence first, we are immediately down to E and we can stop even reading. So, maybe not a full order, but I want to hear some thoughts. What here is present or suggesting it might be a first statement, for example, or what here is suggesting that maybe we have a pair here that can be put together in advance. Any thoughts? Okay. For me, and I will explain my logic, it's quite evident that B is going to be first. No one starts, and the method of elimination is very useful. No one starts an argument with otherwise. No one starts an argument with nor. D is a little bit harder to discount, but what is all this referencing if there's nothing written before it? And if you agree with me that B is the first one, really all we need to do is decide if A or C is next. And that gives us enough to go, is it C, is it D? So, you can just read them to yourself. Is it evident? It is evident that there is no agreement on economic reform. Otherwise, the opposition party would not have opposed FDI in retail today. Sounds very plausible. It is evident there is no agreement on economic reform, nor would allies of the root. That's not a connector, right? There is nor what. It still doesn't work here. Okay, so we can see quite nicely that, yeah, it's C, which is BACD. Hopefully you'll remember that I mentioned broadly in the introduction that this, in my personal view, can be one of the question types where you make up for that lost time, right? It would not surprise me if you had a similar experience in the exam that we've had today. Right, even once you allow extra time for reading comprehension, it takes a little bit more than that even. Do not get complacent with these questions. Don't write down the first order that comes to your head. But being a little bit tactical about it, you can often make up some time on these questions. Here we go. I'm going to give you some time to think about this one yourselves. Okay, what we thinking again does not need to be a full order. Can you see a sentence pair? Actually, I think this is quite a difficult example specifically to find which one goes first. That's the biggest difficulty here for me, but sometimes that's something you can do right away, sometimes it's not. Does anyone have a starting place for us? Okay, let me see if I can get us on the ladder then. Looking at D, they can become strong. My immediate question is, who's they? You can use that sort of question to make a linking pair. To me, it can be B with D, and they are the parents. Or it could potentially be A. The reason I'm a little bit unsure about A upon initial inspection is it would be quite a vague they, right? Are they the administrators or are again they the parents? Also, with regards to which one might go first, the thing that makes it confusing or difficult for me is they all seem to start with words and phrases which do not suggest the start of a passage, right? Hence is a connecting word that is concluding a point from a previously made sentence. Therefore is very similar. However, again seems to form a similar role. So actually, if you continue reading through the sentence, you realize it's not necessarily a follow-on. It can be standalone within its own right. And I've already mentioned my slight issue with D here. Starting off with an undefined pronoun, very unlikely to me. Very unlikely to me. So, if we think it is C, and remember, time is going to be of the essence here. If you're sat there in the exam having the same sort of thought process of, oh, well, this one's difficult because I'm not sure of the linking pairs, or actually a lot of these seem to go against the rules and tips that make an educated guess and move on. You'll lose 5 questions for the sake of 1. Even if you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure it's B. Oh, look, I was wrong. Fine. You'll move on to the next questions and you'll get other marks. Okay. So here it's going to be C, B, D, A. So however important we may regard school life to be, there is nothing to be gained saying the fact that children spend more time at home than in the classroom. Therefore, the great influence of parents cannot be ignored or discounted by the teacher. They can become strong allies of the school personnel. Hence, more and more administrators are becoming aware of the critical need to keep parents apprised. Okay, this is the process I need you all to be going through. Okay, let's take this as a last example. Okay, I've stacked up the presentation nicely, but we'll see if I doubt we'll need all of them. Okay. Where do we start? Not necessarily where do we start as a sentence, we start with B or whatever. I think where do we start in our ordering process? Can we pick out anything which might allow us to get that first step on the ladder? If you can't, let me give you a slight hint by saying that, okay, they're not introducing a person, but a lot of the same logic will apply. Yeah, go ahead.
And I think we should start with B.
Absolutely, I fully agree with you. That's where we have the longest, most detailed introduction of the subject matter. And we can even just from a quick scan of the other ones see that this mobile-based application started in wherever, whenever, is going to be the main source or the main points within this whole article. Cool. So we've got ourselves a starting point. Where do we go now? Because notice we've got some form of introduction, but not too much. So I'm probably looking for the next one, which sort of continues the introduction, continues giving a little bit more detail on the starting point, which has already begun. And remember, if you're sat there thinking, oh, I'm not that sure, once we decide what the next one is, that actually gives us our full answer. Look at answers B, C, and E. If we're starting with D, which I think is a good idea, if we decide A is next, we don't need to continue any further because it's B, right? And similar on for C and similar on for B. So let's say we are considering maybe it's A next. Would C following B then make sense? This mobile application started in Kenya in 2007. The app was initially designed for transferring money, but it soon changed into a financial service and became a big hit. One of the major telecom operators bought the application and launched a pilot in one of its states. Are we convinced? I am. I am. Yeah. So, I tell you what, I think especially, spoilers, I know the rest of the presentation, we've had the heaviest two parts. So I think even though it's a little bit before 5, so we're a little bit early on the break, considering that we've done the heavier stuff, I think it's better to have a slightly early break because the stuff after the break is not going to be quite so dense. So for the online people, oh yeah, that's wrong. It is 5 o'clock. Ignore that clock. Okay, so in that case, we are going to take the Indeed as scheduled break. For those people who are online and did not attend the first one, or indeed people that were here for the first time, we will be taking an hour and a half, from 3:30 to 5 o'clock. We'll now be taking a half an hour break, and then from 5:30 we'll be picking back up again. So take a little pause. I'll see you in a little while. Okay, we seem to be a couple of members down, but still we should restart. Okay, hopefully I see one person having a phone conversation outside. Hopefully they finish off soon. But in the interest of us also finishing off fairly soon, let's continue. Okay, for those online, we'll be continuing the presentation now. Okay, so let's talk about the error identification questions. So specifically, when I mentioned this in the introduction, I mentioned it as the section which has essentially all of the grammar testing in it. I'm going to give you a few particular pieces of grammar or particular grammar rules to look out for, but no, I'm not going to be able to sort of recover the entirety of English grammar, though they do have some favorites, good news. Speaking of good news, before I go into these specific types of grammar they tend to favor, the best piece of news is you don't need to correct the error. You need to find it, that's it. Okay, so the main reason they do this is because many of these grammar mistakes can be corrected in several ways. They don't want any ambiguity in the answers. So they simply make the question to find the error, not necessarily to correct it. Here are a few things to watch out for. To be honest, these mirror a lot of really common, very understandable non-native speaker mistakes. Okay, so not being sort of cognizant enough, not being aware enough of uncountable nouns. Are they being used correctly? Just to be clear, these uncountable nouns are things which we have more of, less of, not a number of. Okay, some of these make sense, like liquids and materials. Some of these make far less sense, like paper. Okay, I'm not inventing the language, I'm just bringing it to you in its current form. Bread is another example which really throws people off. So are uncountable nouns being used correctly? Speaking of common non-native speaker mistakes, when I'm talking about relative clauses, I am talking about the car which is next to the shop, something like that, where we're using it for one of two things. Either to give more information, or as sort of disambiguation, maybe there are two cars there, and you're trying to be specific, hey, I mean that one. In the first instance, you should be using which. In the second instance, you should be using that. The most common mistake for non-natives, though, is people using the word what. So say in the car, what is next to the shop, things like that. That being a really common mistake, you won't need. What you will need is to find the specific mistake here. Who versus whom. Here, you use whom when it is the subject of a verb. Okay. Though in this one, I recommend that you look out for this because you have to sort of quote unquote play the game. In your conversational English, I actually highly discourage people from using the word who. It's a sign that your English tuition has been quite old-fashioned. No native country commonly uses whom anymore. In Britain, you use it if you want to get bullied out of the room. That's it. Okay? But for these questions, bear it in mind. If it's the subject of a verb, look out for whom. Articles. This is a or an, of course, the, this, these, that, or those. Just those 6 words. Okay? It's very rare that one of these questions, the mistake is they need an article and they don't have one. What is much more common is that the question is using the wrong article. Maybe they're using a singular article to refer to a plural subject, or indeed the other way around. So something like that. When I'm talking about agreement for point number 5, it is specifically mostly in number, that last option I have written. Let me give you the classic example, because when I write verb form, I'm also specifically talking about S verb form. Okay, so my example I use with a lot of my students is a clock runs fast. Clocks run fast. I tell my students there's only one S and you've got to share it. Okay, if the noun is plural, the verb is not in S form. If the noun is singular, the verb should absolutely be in S form. They love to throw this one at you. So if you're going to invest sort of in one, I really recommend that one. Number 6 is a weird one, okay? I've written it as diction, but what they're really doing is they're putting a word which is close in either sort of sound, spelling, etc., but it's not really the word that they need. So these are words which, you know, non-native speakers might get commonly confused, and they're just trying to check that you're not one of them. For number 7, we've got idiomatic errors. So really what these are going to be are prepositional mistakes of the kind that we have our own question for and we'll speak about a little more later. Are they using the wrong sort of connecting / helping words? These two from, of, about, in, etc. 8 is one which throws people off a little bit. Because actually, in day-to-day conversation, this rule does get broken. But it's another time where you have to sort of play the game, so to speak. Be really strict with it. Modifiers, are they next to the word which they're modifying? If you're giving sort of a description, some adjective, an extremifier, whatever, keep it nice and close, i.e. next to the word it is modifying. You should not have the word in the middle of your sentence and then some modifier, some additional adjective sitting randomly at the end. Keep those together. Lastly, parallel structure. Things in a list should have the same form, particularly verbs. Okay, we'll actually have some examples of both, but verbs are the most common one. They'll list a couple in sort of the simple tense, etc., and then one at the end they'll throw in the continuous tense for no discernible reason. Okay, again, actually, I'll be honest, you have not a lot of, but I definitely hear non-natives doing this occasionally. Look out for it. If we're starting in one tense, for example, let's stay in it unless there's good reason. And that doubly applies to the verbs. Point number 10, not all passages will have a mistake. I'm going to show you what the questions look like, and not only what the questions look like, I'm going to show you what the answer keys look like. Don't tear your hair out because you can't find a mistake in one. They all have an option at the bottom which said there's no mistake. Okay. Yes, I'm going to show you the answer keys, etc. But for right now, I just want to throw a few examples at you relatively quick fire. Here are a few. See if you can see the mistake in each one. Okay, what's the mistake in the first one? These shoes fits me perfectly.
Don't need the S for the things.
Yeah, and in the question lips again, I'll show you, it'll just have fits underlined because you could change it to this shoe fits me perfectly. You need to change the verb or you need to change the number because currently they do not agree. Cool, what about number 2? This box of books need to be put away. This box of books need to be put away.
Needs to be.
Yeah, essentially we have the same problem in the other direction. The first one used a sort of singular verb with a plural subject, and this is indeed the other way around. To me, question 3 is the trickiest. Do you have any idea? The family next door is fighting amongst themselves again. Yeah, I told you it's the trickiest one. This is one of the slight ones where there's a little bit of a disagreement, mainly between American and British people. And that's whether you use is or are to refer to a collective noun such as family. What we would all agree on is, okay, again, what's that word again modifying? What's that go with? What did they do the first time? What are they doing again? Fighting, right? So we should move that modifier. It should be the family next door is again fighting amongst themselves. Okay, you want to keep those as close as possible. One of my neighbor's kids have broken my window. Any idea? Yeah, this one is actually very similar to 1 and 2. The reason I included this one is because it's slightly more complicated, and sometimes that's all you need to throw people off. So kids is absolutely plural, so you would expect have, which is not the S form, has would be the S form. You would expect have to be completely correct. But because it's one of my, yeah, we're talking about a group of kids, but we're only talking about one of them. So it should be one of my neighbor's kids has broken my window. Again, I'll give you a couple of moments. Okay, I bought a new dress and handbag, but I don't like it. What's the problem?
I don't like them.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. 2 things, even if they are a list, it's not one single plural, should indeed be them. Okay, when a person goes for an interview, you should always look your best. What do we think? Don't worry, especially when it's essentially just the 3 of us and the online people. I'm very happy to just sort of, if no one knows, give it away. This is person agreement. Why are we starting the sentence in 3rd person and jumping into 2nd? You can correct this either way. You can change a person into you, so the whole thing is 2nd person, or you can change you into they. Either is fine, but you cannot sort of mix and match like this. Me and my friend went to a concert last night. I don't know why I have a tendency to make question 3 the trickiest one, but again, it's the trickiest one. It's particularly tricky because even though it's grammatically wrong, if you're being really strict, again, in common speech, people would speak like this all the time. You use me when you are the subject of a verb. So I like someone, but someone likes me. Me is the subject of the verb. There is no verb which me is the subject of. It should be my friend and I went to a concert last night. Mainly I'm including it because even natives don't really focus on this that much. So if they're going to be sort of stringent, if they're going to be strict on one thing, I at least want to give you that heads up. I at least want to give you that warning. What about I'm interested into languages?
Interested in.
Yeah, what about he is turning into a tyrant? He's turning in a tyrant. Yeah, the reason I asked for those answers both together is because absolutely those should be swapped. Okay, you turn into something, but you are interested in something. So these are two examples of those prepositional mistakes. But we'll have a whole section on those, so I'm not going to linger for that long. These I'll just go through, okay? Do you think my new hairstyle is very different than my old one? I mean, they've got the right idea using than for a comparison, but it should be very different from. Speaking of, I'm particularly highlighting this second one here. He prefers rock music above classical music. I'm highlighting it particularly because it should be over. This is a great example of over and above should be synonyms, right? But in a prepositional context, they're frequently not. One and only one will be acceptable, as made clear here. He prefers rock music over classical music. It can't be above. I ate my dinner and have dessert. I included this as an example for non-agreement within lists. Okay, or not even really within a list, but why are we changing tense halfway through a sentence? We should not be. In the tense-related conversation, again, highlighting this because it's a really common non-native thing. There is no reason to use this continuous tense within the last sentence. It's the overuse of the continuous tense is by far the most common mistake I see amongst really advanced non-natives. And I'm speaking people who have lived in the UK for years, people who I will never, ever, ever struggle to have a conversation with. But yet they still use the continuous tense way too much. I entirely understand because the way we label the tenses in English is a lie, right? The simple tense is often much more complicated than the continuous tense. With the continuous tense, you don't have to sit there going, does swim become swam, swimmed, or any of that? And a lot of students of English hit the same problem and find the same solution. I'm just going to use the continuous tense for everything. But they'll make sure, they'll have questions here which make sure it's only being used when we have good reason to use it. And just to be nice and clear, the good reason to use the continuous tense is drawing attention to you being in the process, being in the middle of that activity, either now when it's being spoken or at the point of a previous clause, like I was going through the park when a dog ran in front of me. Okay, I was midway through that activity when something else happened, etc. If you don't have a good reason to be using the continuous tense, don't. The top one is an antithetical example to that. Here, absolutely, you should be using a continuous tense. Let's just jump to the third one. What's wrong with that one? She wore a gold bracelet on her wrist, which cost a lot of money. Yeah, I'm including another one of a misplaced modifier because if I catch you now, hopefully you're not getting caught in the exam. Does her risk cost a lot of money? Probably not. There are many ways we can fix this to put that last clause in a different space, but again, you don't have to worry about that. You highlight the mistake and you move on. See many ways we can change it. And I've included this last example here. Because what is that clearly modifying? Once I moved to the front of the classroom, I could hear the professor speaking clearly. It would be much better to have the clearly next to here. Her moving to the front of the classroom has not affected how clearly the professor is speaking. It's affected how clearly she can hear. Okay, that's enough examples. Here is sort of what it's going to look like in front of you on the test. They will have several underlined sections, and you simply need to find where the error is, remembering that you will always have that option at the end, which is no error. You'll always have that option at the end, which is no error. What do we have here?
I think it's B.
Sorry, was that someone from the online session? I'm happy to accept answers from there as well. Okay.
B.
Say again, sorry?
B. B.
Okay, what's the problem with was punished?
I think it should be where.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. So we have Priscilla and I, even though it's made as a list, it's still two people, just like it can still be two nouns. So we need to make sure that the was becomes were, exactly as you said. Thank you very much for your answer. Give you a moment here. Okay, any thoughts?
Maybe it's supposed to be he was not involved.
Okay, cool. And remember, so we can say maybe it's meant to be involved, maybe it's meant to be another word. Specifically, it's meant to be implicated, which is a word which suggests incriminating someone. But you don't even have to go that far. As soon as you're aware that's not what implied means, tick your box, move on, happy days. Okay, they do give you a little definition of the word implicated there, but I've broadly given you the same. Okay, what about this one? They do seem to like India, by the way. Okay, what do we think the mistake is here? Yeah, definitely building up to the more difficult ones. Don't worry, you're not missing anything obvious. Okay. So here, Here it's this list at the end which needs to be very suspect. Okay, so most Indian students pursue their MBAs immediately after completing college. While a few work, my brain will correct it for me, but okay, I have native brain advantage, fair. While a few work for 2 or 3 years, you've got to see, because this is not one long list at the end. Notice at the beginning, it's pursue their MBAs, it's not pursuing. So they're starting with a simple, then immediately after completing. So that's actually a very valid reason to use a continuous tense, which is actually the same reason before seeking at the end is not a problem. What is a problem is that we should have while a few work for 2 or 3 years. Okay. Cool. Let's do one more. I don't think we need 2 more. Any ideas?
Instead of both, aren't we should use either.
Yeah, we should say neither are. We don't. It's one of those grammatical things which I did not realize until I came to live, nearly exclusively amongst non-natives, and people ask me very reasonable questions, or people say something and my ear alarm goes off, and I'm like, "What was wrong with that grammar?" Yeah, we don't use both with negations. Okay, we use neither are. Okay, let's talk about these prepositions then. We're mainly going to be focusing on example questions, mainly because there's not a massive amount of tips I can give you, unfortunately. Okay, yeah, we're going to be looking at how these sort of helping words, these to, from, etc. Work. But this is the one, if you remember in the introduction, I suggested you sort of take in as much native media as you can. Okay, native speaking podcasts, native speaking YouTube videos. I'm sure I don't need to start listing other things. This is because these are just things you pick up by ear. I feel massively sorry for my friends who ever struggle with them, because they look to me for advice, and I just say, I wish I could give you some, right? So let's look at what the questions are going to look like. You won't just be doing it one at a time. They will be grouped together like this. Okay. But again, you get some advantage in the fact that, okay, we've got 6 possible different answer options. 6 times 5 times 4 is 120. Yes. You do not have 120 different order combinations down here. Okay, so you already have a way to limit these down. Particularly, let's say you struggle with one of these. You immediately know the answer to 1. You immediately know the answer to 3. But you're confused about question 2. It's a good chance you don't even need to be, right? What do we think the answer is for question 1?
Alone.
Along? Absolutely. What do we think the answer is for question 3? Yeah, 4. And then as soon as I'm like, it's B something E, again, imagining I have no idea how to answer question 2, it's A. Full stop. I don't need to sit here. Now, of course, John was accused of cheating in the exam. I do know is the correct answer. But to give you an exemplar for these exam techniques. I have a few examples. We might end up skipping a little bit, but I want to at least get towards the end ones because it can be a little bit easy to get complacent with these questions, and not all of them are going to be so simple as that first one. What do we think the answers are here?
See.
E.
Sorry, for the online participant, unfortunately, the letterings are a bit confusing. Are you talking about the full answer A, so it's B, D, E? Is that what you mean?
No. I meant for the between is the first one. So
But, oh, so you're saying A is at for the first question.
no, I meant so E is the first one.
Oh, yes. Yeah, cool. We're back
So-
on the same page. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry.
No, don't be. It's very hard to communicate with these letter systems. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. We should be looking at Krishna said he would arrive between 2 and 3. And notice we only need to work out one of the two others because we only have 2 which start with E. Ironically, C and D, which is how the confusion happens. But we can just immediately go, okay, well, if it is part C, it says from for the next one, which would make sense. Or the second one says in the newly constructed shopping mall, the shops stay open on 11 a.m. to, yeah, we can probably move on. Okay. So it's definitely here going to be EBD, which is answer C. I will be switching back. I'm just trying to work out which of these I will use as examples and which of these we'll move on from. Okay, let's try some of the slightly trickier ones, and then I've got our worst one sort of coming up. Okay, being nice and specific, what's the answer to go in that first gap? The administration's new proposals have been met. Yeah, absolutely. The children are so excited to eat out that they are unable to choose between a pizza. Yeah, to be honest, I will question whether this is a real preposition or just someone using a connective. But it is relating specifically to choosing between, which I think is what they're going for here. Lastly, when asked to come to the party, Ramesh declined, saying that he had decided to stay. What do we think? Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's go. Yeah, let's have a look at this one because this one is a little bit more difficult. Specifically, when I say this one is a bit more difficult, I want to highlight that beside and besides look real similar, but they're used in actually surprisingly different contexts. So which one applies here? What do we think?
Besides for the person.
He was sitting beside his sister. Unfortunately, that's not correct. So when we use besides, it tends to mean as an alternative. So I play no other instrument besides guitar, something like that. When it's a much more literal version of I am next to someone, I am next to a chair, I am next to whatever, it should just be beside without the S. Okay? It should just be beside without the S. I think you're not going to struggle with the other two. So hopefully I think we'll just move on to yeah, I think this is the biggest, scariest one. So why not go in at the deep end? Okay. So maybe as you're reading these through, you're reading the first one and going, oh, Harry, you said this was one of the harder ones. And then you get on to 2 and 3. Okay. To me, 2 is a little bit tricky, particularly because, okay, I can actually imagine 2 maybe or so which could fit in there. But that's fine. Remember, if we can get an answer to question 3, often 1 and 3 will be enough for us to pick an answer because there can only be 1, 2 in that instance. So you think it's all going well, and then the starting word is silicate. If you know what that means, you're better than me, right? And unfortunately, after this, we are going to be heading on to the not the preposition, the word correction, sorry. And that will also contain the more difficult questions or the more difficult words. But it's good practice to sort of work around what would make sense with the rest of the parts that we do understand. Okay, what do we think? What do we think? Even if you're making a sort of educated guess after knowing the answer to 1 and then seeing, okay, what other ones are going to fit. Yeah, I'll take online answers as well. Yeah.
I think it's B.
You think it's B, so we're specifically going for B, C, D?
Yes, please.
The mysterious appearance of Rahul in Tihar. That seems good to me. A surprising appearance. No, sorry, a surprising finding has come about for, is that correct? B, C, D? Yeah. Has come about for the ingenuity, perseverance, and global cooperation. And then B, C, D. So from silicate bodies, such features are typically attributed to water and hydroxyl-bearing materials. Yes. Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. The thing that's tricky to me is more about finding which possible, which of the preposition options for 2 is correct, sorry. Because to me, through also seems convincing. But once you go through the options and see, okay, what's that going to imply? What's that going to suggest for the 3rd question? It doesn't quite work. So I agree with your answer. Thank you very much. Okay. Don't worry, guys. Final straight. I'm as tired as you are, if anything else more. Right, let's have a look at sentence completion. My main warning for this one is the difficulty of the language. So for that reason, I'm going to draw to your attention that this is one you should focus on eliminating incorrect answers much more. Sometimes you'll get the correct answer and you didn't even know what the word meant. That's fine, you just got to get through that exam. Okay, for general guidance, think of a word which would fit the gap according to you. Good news, that word can be much simpler than a lot of the suggestions will be. That can be a lot simpler than a lot of the suggestions will be. But it will frequently be a synonym to what the correct answer is. When trying to make your own word which could go in this gap, please pay extra attention to keywords and connectors. Do the previous words imply tension? Things like although and however. Or is it something which you expect to be in agreement or even an extremifier? So going from good to amazing, something like that. With regards to the frankly difficult language, focus on the prefixes, focus on the suffixes. You're going to find out here that we have synonyms and antonyms, a lot of these things in play. So you won't need to know the full definition of a word, but if you can understand that words beginning with mal, for example, are frequently bad, malnutrition, malgovernance, any other things, you don't need to know exactly what bad they are talking about, but if you can get that it is something bad, that's gonna be a good start. One extra bonus, especially when we're talking about incorrect answer elimination. I'm going to draw your attention to inseparable words. If you can identify two answers which are synonymous, you can eliminate both of them. Because if they're truly synonymous, how could they know? How could one of them be correct and the other one be wrong? So if you can notice the two of the answers are synonymous, cross out both of them. The last point is what I just kind of mentioned. By the way, if you don't know antonyms, instead of two words meaning the same thing, i.e. synonyms, they are two words that mean the opposite thing. Let's look here. As far as these questions go, none of these words are as bad. I suspect you know 4 out of 5, if not all 5. But let's look at toe. Okay, maybe you know all the answer words, but you don't know all the words in the question. For example, I think the word unruly is much less common than any of those answer words. But you want to be picking up on toe. Okay, it's not going to be, oh, they're faithful and that was quite shocking. Or they're quite perseverant. No, we're looking probably for a negative connotation. Again, unruly also has a negative connotation. And there's nothing else in the sentence which is suggesting the tone should change here. There's no but, however, etc. So, what do we think here?
Disobedient.
Yeah, very much disobedient. All the others are, well, apart from depressing, all the others are broadly positive words. Okay, so here there's not like an exact question. They're taking you through the same process I just took you through. So say you're reading through a question and it says, the disease was benign, but. So we're expecting some opposite word for benign. And they have deliberately included words which are a bit more complicated. I myself know 3 out of 5. Okay? So we can start playing the sort of educated guess, the suffixes and prefixes game. Not only for our answer, but I wouldn't blame anyone who doesn't know the word benign to begin with. It's nearly exclusively used in medical contexts. What might give us some clues? So, firstly, okay, specifically the people in the room, have you guys all heard of the word benign? Is it new to you? New, fair enough. Okay. And to be honest, that's the best case for an example like this, because we can all practice with words we know and then get hit in the exam with ones we don't. So, we can play the prefix game, okay? Do we have words, other words that begin with B or Ben that seem to have some common theme? Is it a prefix that we can add to another word to sort of change its meaning? And it is, though it's one of those prefixes, sorry, which it's quite old. So you probably know words which use it, but you don't realize that it comes from a prefix to begin with. Words like benefit. We actually have a word benevolent, which means all loving. Okay. This prefix, sorry, is used for positive things. Okay. And once you're highlighting that it's used for positive things, and I may or may not have used mal as a prefix example a few minutes ago, hopefully, even if you walk away with no serious idea what benign and malevolent mean, they will make your educated guess as purely being better than anything else which is on there. Here's another. So notice I've given you a little bit of sort of guidance around what they expect you to expect. Even if you don't know what refulgent is, and I used this example last year and I still don't know what it means, we can see that it's going to be an antonym of it. We can see that it's going to be an antonym of it. How can we see that? Well, if they had broadly similar connotations, if they had broadly similar ideas, why would the groom's expression be perplexing? Okay, so they're talking, and if you don't know the word perplexing, it means confusing or like ununderstandable. So if they were in agreement, there would be no confusion. Okay. Is there anything else I gave you which might help limit down these options? Because actually the options here, the problem here is not that the options are particularly difficult words. It's that the clue you have to arrive at them is difficult. What can we use here? Any ideas?
Radiant and distant, kind of like synonyms.
See, right answer, wrong pair. So radiant and glowing mean the same thing. Distant is not the same as radiant. But absolutely, you can get rid of glowing and radiant immediately because they are synonyms. Also, by the way, they are synonyms for, I don't want to say it, refulgent, however you're saying it, that it means radiant or glowing. So actually, our word here is going to be dull, C. But even if you just manage to eliminate those two, going from 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 over several questions will help you massively. Okay, here's one where we're not just throwing crazy complex words at you. Okay, before I ask you sort of what you think for this one, let's think if I didn't give you these answers, what would you put in as your prediction? Right, if I didn't give you these answer options, what would you put in as your prediction? We have a not that it merely. So we're expecting it to contrast with deepening and extending our knowledge.
Confirm.
Absolutely, thank you very much. Yeah, we don't want it to just sort of confirm or even reaffirm. We're looking for something that extends it beyond that rather than sort of leaving it where it is. This is what you can be writing down. Okay, so it's key phrases because that connector is useful. That's good. But for us to have contrast, we need to know, okay, what's it contrasting with? And reiterate, restate would both be two very reasonable sort of words to meet those two conditions. And then once you see confirm, you're fine. Okay. I included this broadly as the worst they can throw at you. Right? Of all those pairs, there's 2, 3 I know both of. But let's look at the context first. There are many things to be said about newspapers, but much of the blank is blank when one considers that every now and then they develop a truly great writer like John Marquis. So, for example, if we're thinking that the first word is positive, I expect the second word to be negative. Right? Even in that last part, it looks like we have a lot of tension. And that can limit down our options. Okay? Criticism and upheld. Okay, it's hard to get rid of the ones which we're not really that sure of the meaning of. But you don't need to get rid of all of them, you need to get rid of some. Okay, all but one is obviously perfect, but you do what you can. I don't like criticism and upheld Because how would a great writer exist to support criticism of the writer? That doesn't work for me. So, in instances like this, where you suspect strongly that you need tension, either it's a positive followed by a negative or a negative followed by a positive, and even the positive followed by a negative wouldn't be that great. Let's look at part E. But much of the applause is negated when one considers that they have great writers. Oh, no, probably not. Right, so we've already got down to A, B, or C. Pick the one which you're just most sure of the meanings of, because that's what you've got to guide you, right? You've got to know that there's tension and it's likely the first one is negative. Can you tell me what somnolence means? I can't, right? So it's going to be very hard to know if that meets your conditions. Same with blandishment. So even, I'm not just sort of playing along as the native here. No, I really don't know A or B either. I'm going to be going for C. Purely because I just know what both of those words mean. And they meet our condition. Or they meet our prediction, let's put it that way. Okay. Yeah, okay, I think that's enough practice. They do have longer ones. I'm not going to necessarily have us sit here and go through these, but I do want to highlight that they can have longer ones. It's rare, but I don't want you being caught and being sort of unprepared for it. They can give you longer ones. Okay, bringing us home, analogies is indeed the last topic, the last question type available to us. I haven't got a list of tips because I've got one main tip and I do not need a slide for it. They are going to give you a pair of words. Before you even look at what the possible answers are, you should decide a good relationship between them. Then and only then will you be able to go through the answers and go, oh yes, this seems to meet a similar relationship. Okay, I'll give you kind of similar advice for other questions as well. Here it's the most important, because until you decide the relationship they're going for in the original pairing, you're just not going to be able to get much further. This is what a question will look like in practice. So you've got to think. And by the way, you can do this either way around, as long as you're consistent. So you could look at this and go, a really fast trickle is a gush. Or a really slow gush is a trickle. But keep track of which one you're doing. If you're starting with the first word and getting yourself to the second, do that with the answers as well. If you're starting with the second and going to the first, again, do that with the answers as well. Both of them will work absolutely fine. What won't work fine is mixing and matching. For example, even just looking at A, if I take that idea, to gush is to trickle quickly. You have to get the order right, otherwise A is the answer. A is not the answer. Okay? You would say to gush is to trickle quickly, to walk is to run quickly. No, if it was the other way around, it would be the answer, but it's not, so it isn't. what's our answer here? Well, to collapse is to rise quickly. No. To dog is to puppy quickly. No. To gulp is to sip quickly. Oh, actually, yes, it is. Okay. You want to be taking that same, essentially, it's like a sentence with variables in it, right? You just need to take your two blanks, cycle through them, which one fits the blanks. They won't. They can give lots of these different connections. I've deliberately included some of the most common ones. So here they have an antonym, right? An antonym. These two words are opposites. Again, we do have some more difficult words. Not as bad as the last section, but in this section you can expect them as well. But notice, let's say you're unsure about some of the words in the middle section. Stroll is definitely not the opposite of walk. We can get rid of that immediately. Resilient and durable are similarly synonyms. Noxious and poisonous actually are as well. They're not so directly synonymous, but they are surely not antonyms. Actually, felicitate and taunt are the only pair of words up there which are not broadly synonymous. Felicitate, if you don't know the word, means to aid in, assist, to mediate. They also like their difference of degree questions. Think good to amazing. Here they have joy to euphoria. So again, I will highlight the order matters. The order matters. What are we thinking here? Any ideas? So euphoria is extreme joy. Sorrow is extreme misery. We're getting closer, but actually I would say misery is more extreme. Ecstasy is extreme triumph. We're getting closer, but it's more like ecstasy and euphoria, basically synonymous. Type is extreme right. That doesn't even make sense. Cold is extreme punish. Scold is extreme punish. Not really, but we're getting closer. Wrath is extreme anger. Okay, wrath is a word that is mainly used in the Bible, not in sort of modern conversation, but yet it is still absolutely the correct answer. They also like these, which link some sort of profession to what they do, or something which describes them well. What would be a good connecting sentence? Okay, I'm not asking you yet for like what one you think the answer is. I am asking you for what is a good sentence that can connect critic and fault that we can then start putting the other ones through. Okay. So the job of a critic is to find faults. Is the job of an artist to find praise? No. And by the way, it won't be always exactly down to the exact word. So, for example, if the job of an artist was to praise, just without that word find, yeah, you should still probably consider it. You know, there's going to be several sentences which can connect a critic to fault. Don't be so specific. The job of an amateur is to persevere. Let me put a question mark next to that. It doesn't sound like the most natural, but if the other ones are complete rubbish, maybe we'll come back to it. It is the job of an athlete to practice. Honestly, similar thing. I think we can find better ones, but if I'm wrong in that, we can always come back. The job of an arbitrator is to mediate. Yeah, we're not going to need to go back to B and C. Okay, so an arbitrator is indeed someone that will help us felicitate, to use this one from the last slide. It's someone that will assist in agreements, contracts, legal or otherwise. You will have an arbitrator and they mediate. Notice it is not meditate. Okay, cool. I don't need to. Cool. Okay. So this is similar, except we're not looking for a particular description of a job. We're looking for broad characteristics that you might associate with it. You would expect an acrobat to have agility. What do you think the answer is here? I'm throwing it out to the online session as well. What do you all think? Cool. I'll read the book. Okay, so as much as I wish that all students had perseverance, I think it's much more likely that surgeons must have dexterity. Again, you will have to make slightly educated guesses if you're pretty sure you know what the word dexterity means, but you're not 100%. Again, just sort of put a question mark next to it and see if you need to come back to it depending on what the other answers are like. Good news for all involved. Last example, but I had to include one relating to cause and effect. It's another one of their relationships they like quite nicely. One will cause the other. Maybe not directly. Notice in their examples at the top right, water does not cause thirst, but I'm sure you can think of a causal relationship which is non-direct. So, pain causes someone to writhe. In fact, actually, okay. I thought I'd included the answer sheet on for this one, but I'll just give it as an explanation. So, hopefully, you can eliminate a couple just to begin with. No, joy does not cause us to envy. No, stress does not cause us to monotony. doesn't even make sense. And courage and fear are, you know, antonyms. So even if you're unsure of particularly E, you can probably healthily get it down to A or E. Either verity causes us to specious, or anger causes us to see. 1 in 2 is much better than 1 in 5, even if you're, let's say, not sure what seed means, and you're not sure what specious, if I'm even pronouncing that correctly, means. Try and pick one which is most likely, could most fit your established link. Okay, in here, you can seethe with anger. If you don't know the word seethe, it broadline means to shake with anger. If someone is sat there and you can see they can't even pretend not to be angry. Okay, that's the answer here. We've got a couple of more examples, but what I'm going to do is what we did last time. These are going to be uploaded on the Corvinus site. So these examples we didn't have time to go through today. You will be able to see the presentations on the Corvinus website. So you'll be able to look through those in your own time, including any of the comments I made, at least the typed ones, just for your own practice. The last thing I will mention, and it really is the last, I'm not even going to take us through this question, is that they throw some in there. Don't worry, they're nice and labeled. You're not going to be confused or anything. But where you're instead looking for one which does not share the same relationship pair. So I don't think I need to give any extra guidance regarding that. Just purely, you should know that they can exist, they can come up. Okay. To the people online as well as the people in person, I thank you very much for your time and patience. If you have questions, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask. Otherwise, I thank you very much for your time.